Mark Rogers TV, enjoying this series that we've launched last week where we're talking to bloggers across the country about their team's biggest wins and most crushing defeats since they've been watching college football. So think about it, and we'd like you to chime in as well. We're talking to Oklahoma State's Robert Whetsell. He writes for Cowboys Ride for Free on the SB Nation platform. Hey, Robert, how are you tonight?
Doing great. Thanks a lot for having us on, as always, Mark.
So, Robert, by request, we're going to get the losses out of the way. So these are crushing, excruciating losses, and the criteria is wide open. This could be something that you'll look back upon and say, you know, we had a really good football program. We were on the cusp of contention, and then this sent us spiraling, and we didn't recover for 5 or 10 years. Or it could be just an emotional loss. Of course, rivalries play into this, championships play into this, but it could be less tangible than that. So we leave it to you, looking back at Oklahoma State football since you've been watching, and what are those 3 crushing losses?
Well, if I went strictly from a personal standpoint, there wouldn't be a single game on this list that didn't involve either University of Oklahoma or Nebraska. You know, personally, my most crushing loss was, I believe it was 1974, and my parents and I traveled up to Nebraska, courtesy of a gentleman that my dad used to do some cattle business with, and we went to the game against Nebraska, and Oklahoma State had the ball. They were down 7-3, drove down the field with little time left in the game, and Charlie Weatherby, you know, everybody ran kind of a wishbone or a veer or something like that, and he rolled out to the right, faked the pitch, and dove to the goal line, and he fumbled on the 1-yard line right there in front of us. We were sitting about 30 rows up right on that goal line on that side of the field, and I thought as a child, I was 12 years old, I thought I was going to cry. I literally thought I was going to cry. So if I had to rate one, that really would be up there. But, you know, in reviewing this list, this really comes back to more recent history, you know, when you talk about relevance, you know, the relevance of the win or the loss. Number 3 on my list is 1988 Bedlam. Most Cowboy fans know that game as the drop. OSU famously drove down the field, you know, with time running out. There was a very controversial personal foul, unsportsmanlike conduct penalty called after Barry Sanders had run wide on a 3rd down. Would have been 4th and, you know, less than a yard. And Oklahoma State probably would have gone for it. Score was 31-28. And as the players went out of bounds, I believe I can't remember the name of the player's name. It was the fullback blocking for Sanders, and he and an OU player kind of gotten, you know, tied up a little bit out there. And supposedly the OSU player yelled an obscenity at the OU player, and the official threw a flag. 15 yards unsportsmanlike. And now, you know, they're pretty much looking at, you know, give it a heave if they think they can. And Gundy threw probably the greatest pass of his career. Couldn't have thrown 100 balls and thrown it more perfectly, right over the outstretched arms of a defender. And Brent Parker is open in the back of the end zone, and the ball hits him in the gut and then goes out the side. And Brent Phillips famously used that example to name the sports devil Squinky, because he said the ball came in and went squink out the side. So now the OSU sports devil became Squinky. So that was a brutal loss. I was sitting in a hotel room in Los Angeles with my mother and father and my first wife, and we were in the hotel room with my lifetime best friend, who is an OU fan, and his mother and father, and his fiance. We were out there for like an engagement party. And that simultaneous joy and agony in that moment, it's like when the ball went in his hands, we were in the air, and they were like, and in the next second it was just flipped. And that was just, oh God, I still, that leaves a horrible taste in my mouth. The number 2 on the list is way more recent. and so probably much more painful to a lot of younger Oklahoma State fans. And that's Bedlam of last season, 2013. Oklahoma State came in clearly favored as the team, better team talent-wise. OU had all kinds of issues going on at quarterback. Oklahoma State was on a roll, having thrashed Baylor on national TV. And, you know, you look at last season, and as much sort of up and down stuff as Oklahoma State felt like they'd had, you still, with a win in Bedlam, Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. That would have been 2 championships in 3 years, and that really would have cemented the Cowboys as the new sort of current power. You know, maybe loosely to use that term, because it's not like they were dominant, but that really would have made a statement, and I think would have been a world of difference based on the other result, which how the season ended. But to lose the way they did at the end, to look so out of it, Oklahoma State fans, that stunk. I mean, it really stunk. You know, it stinks to be favored over OU and not beat them. That's as little as few times as we've had that opportunity. You know, that's why 1988 makes the list. The last time prior to '88 that OSU had beaten OU was 1976. And so the decade of the 80s was a great decade for Oklahoma State, football-wise. And, you know, prior to this time, that was probably the greatest decade. If you get, you know, into definitely the greatest decade in modern times until, you know, we're in this current decade. So to go into a game where you feel like you're going toe-to-toe, or you're definitely favored, you're clearly seen as the better team, and not win, you know, given the record in Bedlam for OSU, that really stunk. And with the prize that was on the line, that was a big deal. The number one loss, I just can't believe that any Oklahoma State fan would disagree with this. And that would be the loss to Iowa State in Ames in 2011. A win surely puts them in a national championship game picture. Obviously, they still would have had Bedlam. They still need to win Bedlam, but they would have won Bedlam, you know, based on what we saw happen. They would have won Bedlam, and they would have played for a national championship. And the circumstances around that game, too, with the death of Coach Budke and Coach Cerna and the Brandstetters and the plane crash, you know, it harkened back to the Remember the 10 with the basketball team, and for the team to go out and get, you know, you could tell they weren't all there, and things just didn't go their way. The bounces weren't going their way. The field goal attempt that, if it had been 3 inches farther to the left, would have been good, and probably wins the game for them. That really, I'd have to say, as an Oklahoma State fan, that's by far and away the most crushing loss, because for a program that had worked and built and gotten to that moment, and to have you know, the national championship opportunity right there, and have it go poof, you know, in a matter of 60 minutes of football, you know, really, and you couple that with the death of the basketball coaches, which was really a crushing blow for the school as a whole, period. But yeah, that by far and away, I think, is number one on the list. I could go through a litany of games. You know, there was a loss in the 70s, and I can't remember if it was 74, 76, where Colorado had a pretty good team and came to Stillwater, and Oklahoma State had the lead, and it was down to the tail end of the game. Colorado threw a desperation pass, you know, like about a 50 yarder, and I believe, I want to say he was a safety, Gary Irons. And you know that they pronounced it not Irons, but it was Irons. and I believe he was a safety, and he intercepted the ball about a yard or two deep in the it was in the east end zone. I remember this. I remember it like it was yesterday. In the east end zone on the far side, right by the pylon, he intercepts the ball, and instead of just taking a knee, that's the end of the game. He takes a knee, it's the end of the game. He decides to run out, and a dude hits him at the 1 yard line, and he fumbles. Colorado falls on the ball, scores to win, winning score to take the game. And that as a kid, that wore me out. I couldn't stand that. There, obviously were a lot of Bedlam stories in there where, gosh, they were in the game at halftime and, they do something silly like they don't cover the kickoff, second half kickoff, and they let OU cover it for a touchdown. It's ridiculous stuff. They had a couple losses to Texas here in the 2000s. So I'm sure I could reel off, any number. But for me, those three really define moments where if it had gone the other way, it really could have made a huge difference for the program.
Robert, I didn't expect to have a whole lot of input here, but I'll run down what comes to mind for me. First off, that Colorado game, I would expect that was 1976 just because Colorado won the Big 8 in 76 and went to the Orange Bowl and played Ohio State that year. So I'm just guessing that it was 1976.
There was a three-way tie that season, and I can't remember if it was Oklahoma State, OU, and Nebraska, or Oklahoma State, OU, and Colorado. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like 74, 75, 76, right in there, where they had decent teams. They were always going around 7-4, 6-5, and OU and Nebraska and Colorado, even Missouri were tough wins. So you could be right. Of course, I'm going to have to go look it up. So
so that's just a guess because I know Colorado again played in the Orange Bowl, which at that point obviously was the prize for the Big 8 champion and was for a long time. When I think about Oklahoma State history, and we've discussed this before, being an outsider, being a guy that tries to keep track of things nationally, and thinking back on my youth, of course, Oklahoma State didn't really reach any type of radar, didn't come onto my radar. I remember that 1985 team. You had a really good team in 85, if I remember right, like a 10-2 football team. Pat Jones coaching.
Pat Jones, Thurman Thomas, good crew.
Played in a Gator Bowl.
Played the Gator Bowl, yep.
Florida State?
Yep, played Florida State. I actually watched the replay. It was on, I want to say it was on ESPNU, or maybe I might have watched it online. But yeah, that was tough to watch. They were outclassed in that game, and it was tough.
Hung in there, but yeah, they were outclassed. They lost by like 10 or 14 points, something
like 33-24 or something like that. So
you bring up 1988, of course. Instantly, college football fans think of 1988. Heisman Trophy winner Barry Sanders really put you on the map, even though you did have that success during the mid-'80s with Pat Jones as coach, who was still there, of course. But my thought is, let's see, how good was Oklahoma in '88? Well, we know that with Jamel Holloway, Charles Thompson, those characters at quarterback, won a national championship in '85. We're right there playing for a national championship against Miami in '86. We're right there '87, '88. I don't think they were quite that good, but they were pretty darn good. They were a top 10 football team. I know that they really took out Clemson in a bowl game in '88, '89, in that range. So I'm almost interested to look up to see how good Oklahoma was in 1988 as well. You bring up the 2013. Well, we're just there. And while you were running down kind of the disappointment of these losses, of course you know better than I do that with expectation comes more bitter losses. So it's almost a good thing, Robert, that you can possibly expect to suffer more severe losses going forward because the expectations are going to be high. If you've got a 4-7 football team and you lose those games, well, are they really frustrating, bitter losses? Not typically. It's kind of overall frustration. at that point. But when you've got really good football teams and you're losing 1, 2, 3 football games a year, then you bring in the disappointment. And of course, yeah, Iowa State 2011, I posted a video claiming that Oklahoma State still should have played for the national championship because I had a twofold argument that a number of people did. Number one, you keep hearing from pundits out there during the BCS era, Robert, that the regular season's the playoff. Well, if the regular season's the playoff, Alabama and LSU already played. So they played their playoff game.
Right.
And number two, I give the nod to the conference champion. And I even was challenged by a number of people and admitted if I had to put my mortgage on the line and we were going to play a tournament, I would have put the bank on Alabama and LSU being the two best teams in the country. But it's not necessarily about trying to predict who the best teams are,
right.
Who's deserving, who's earned it. Well, they play a Big 12 championship, and that was an extremely strong conference. Oklahoma State won the conference. So we're only looking at two teams in the country that only lost one game and won a conference championship. Those two criteria equaled Oklahoma State playing LSU. So, yeah, that was very difficult, and the circumstances obviously transcend football and were really difficult to take. So for any Oklahoma State fans, I know you mentioned some other games. Is there one or two maybe that also stand out that possibly could be mentioned?
Oh, boy. You know, there were a couple of losses to the Longhorns in the 2000s. One, you know, Oklahoma State wasn't very good. I'm trying to remember if it was Vince Young, and it was here I go now. My recent memory is not so clear, as my long term here. So, and I don't know if it's 05 or 06, but Oklahoma State ran out to a big lead. Did not have a great team, but ran out to a big lead at the half, and then Vince Young essentially just ran all over the field in the second half, and they came back and won. But then they had another one, I want to say it was maybe 2 years later, where Colt McCoy brought them back in the second half, and they kicked a long field goal. I'll never forget Dave Hunziker's call of the field goal. So they get lined up, and you hear, Hunziker's he's into the excitement of the game, and here they go, and the kick is up, and it's on the way, and it's good. Cowboys lose, whatever the score was, and we'll be back in a minute. That's gonna be the most depressed human being in the world right now. But those two were tough losses. One, you had a program that was trying to change it. It'd come off a couple of big Bedlam wins early in the decade with Les Miles as the coach, and you're looking for a signature win, something to keep that momentum going, and those types of losses where you build up that lead and then you can't hold it are tough. The West Virginia loss last year was tough. That was a tough. A lot of momentum. The team was still feeling pretty good. Coming out of non-conference play and to look sloppy and everything, and everybody got kind of depressed all of a sudden about what was going to happen the rest of the season. I just think back on so many Bedlam losses.
Yeah.
If my dad and I were quail hunting, and we took an old transit. We had this transistor radio we carried with us, and this had to be the early '80s. Late 70s or early 80s. I don't remember exactly. Well, it was I believe it was the kind of in the era of Joe Washington, and I think the score was like 14-10 Oklahoma State at the half. So we're excited. We're pretty much stopped bird hunting. We're sitting still. The dog is there. We're really not doing anything but listening to the trying to get a good reception on the radio to listen to the game. And the opening kickoff of the second half, OSU's receiving, and they don't cover the kick. They just let it bounce. OU runs down, covers the kick for a touchdown. And Oklahoma State proceeds to lose the game like 44-14, or it was just, those were the times there was a loss, and maybe it was in the 90s, but it's very famous. OSU people remember this, where Oklahoma State had the lead and it looked great. OU had scored, and they weren't even, I believe the story goes, that they weren't even going to onside kick. They were just going to like squib it. All right? Well, the guy squibs it, and it hits an OSU player dead in the back who's retreating to block, and they cover it and kick a field goal to tie the game. This was before overtime. Kick a field goal to tie the game. Don't win. So, OSU people, it's not just heartbreaking losses, it's how some of these things, the ridiculous circumstances, and how some of these things happen. So, yeah, there's too many to mention, I'm sure.
I think that's the response for most of us regarding our team. So it's Robert Whetsell. Read the banner. It's Cowboys Ride for Free on the SB Nation platform. He just outlined the 3 most crushing losses for him in Oklahoma State football history. Would, of course, like you to chime in, give us your comments and your list of those excruciating, crushing losses that still kind of stick in your craw. Robert, we're going to have you back, and we're going to talk about victory.
Yes.
So we're going to end this on a high note, put a smile on your face, and we'll talk about those big wins in Oklahoma State football history very soon. We'll have you right back, Robert.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark.